Hello, guys, and welcome back to a very interesting live stream. I was on Twitter and I saw that there's a new interview by Adam Spice that was done by Deutsche Bank. I quickly listened to it and I was like, oh my God, this interview is just too hot. I need to do like a shared live stream so I can share the moments with you and then I can take notes and go over the most important things. So he's going to extensively talk about Rocket Lab's moat, how he got hired to Rocket Lab. He's going to give a full Neutron update, and he's going to speak about the constellation business of Rocket Lab and give a lot of mind-blowing data. So normally I like to have click enticing titles. Some would say clickbait. I just say click enticing titles. But this one is not that. This interview for me was really, really, really mind-blowing. So I'm curious to see what you guys are going to think about it. And before we continue, I really want to know, is my mic working correctly? Can you guys confirm that we are live and it is working correctly? Because on my end, it's not looking perfect. Awesome. So, by the way, welcome Matt Box, welcome Gregory. Awesome, guys. Okay, before we start, I just want to give a quick shout out to the channel members. We have 21 people who support the channel. If you guys want to join and become, and you feel you get value out of my channel, it would be very nice if you join. The link is in the description below. I'm going to now keep it very quiet. We go through the podcast and then we're going to do a Q&A together. And then that will be it. So when I start the video, please again, let me know if you can hear the audio because sometimes the audio doesn't work for some reason. So here we go.
Podset, the podcast from Deutsche Bank Research, with interviews on current economic and financial topics. Listen as economists and analysts from Deutsche Bank present their views.
Do you guys hear this?
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Podzept. My name is Edison Yu, and I lead the space and satellite research here at Deutsche Bank. As part of our Making Sense of Space series, we welcome Adam Spice, CFO at Rocket Lab. Thank you for joining us, Adam.
Thanks for having me.
A quick background on the company. Rocket Lab is an end-to-end space company with an established track record of mission success, having launched well over 50 rockets into orbit and supplied components to 1,700 satellites. Rocket Lab was founded in 2006 in New Zealand and now has over 1,700 employees globally. Financially, on a quarterly basis, the company broke through $100 million in sales, representing the largest amount for any publicly traded new space company on the market. So with that, I think listeners know we did have Peter Beck on our first edition. I think it's about 2 years ago, and talked about how you got interested in rockets. I know from reading about your background, Adam, you actually spent a lot of time in the semiconductor industry. Can you tell us about your journey through there and then what drew you to Rocket Lab?
Sure. And by the way, even in as short a time as since our statistics came out, so we're now at over 2,000 employees since reported the 1,700 previously. So we're growing very rapidly, which is exciting. A lot of cool stuff I'm sure we'll get into more details on. But yeah, my journey to space was a little bit different, I guess, than some others. So after spending 25-ish years in the semiconductor industry, where I started off my career in the 90s at Intel, and then worked my way to Broadcom in the 2000s. And then 2010, I was at an analog mixed signal RF company called MaxLinear, which was also publicly traded. And then I got a, kind of an out of the blue call from a recruiter, and I usually don't take recruiter calls. But he said, hey, there's this unicorn startup, basically looking to become kind of one of the big players in this new space economy. And, I think you really should talk to them. I don't think so, but he harassed me a few times. I agreed to take a meeting with Pete, and Pete and I met up, and it was one of those things where you ask a bunch of questions and you start to get some real interesting responses back, which was a little bit different than I was expecting. And I quickly pieced together that he was really onto something as far as his vision for what the size of the opportunity is, and then just a very pragmatic way of getting there, right? And then he invited me out to New Zealand over a Thanksgiving weekend back in 2017 and said, come check stuff out on the ground. So I went over there and was just absolutely amazed of the capital efficiency that what he developed, or what the team had developed, with such a scant amount of capital. Because, you know, the rocket business is notorious for being incredibly capital consuming. And it's true, there's a lot of infrastructure and you can spend a lot of money very quickly. And we've seen people who've done that very poorly, right, in our space. And some of those have gone bankrupt and had a lot of challenges along the way. But when I saw what had been done for around $100 million and have a functioning rocket with the infrastructure and a pad and all the other things, it was just, I was blown away. Because, you know, and also in the semiconductor market, I mean, it hadn't been uncommon to develop a relatively, you know, I would say not even the most complex chip can cost you 50 to 100 million or hundreds of millions of dollars. And that's really just pure R&D. That's not even putting any infrastructure in place, because typically you'll use foundries, right? So yeah, I was just, when I saw the capital efficiency and the practicality of what Pete had built, I was like, all right, I'm in, I'll take a flyer. Literally.
I assume no regrets thus far.
You know, probably my biggest regret is that I sold my Broadcom stock too early. So but that has nothing to do with Rocket Lab. So no, this is I would say no regrets, but I would certainly say this has been way harder than I ever thought it was going to be. After spending, you know, those years in semiconductors, I thought there was nothing that was more complicated than semiconductors, and I was so wrong. Because rockets, literally, you know, the complexity of physics and all the complexities that get added to that, with far as, you know, geopolitical concerns and regulatory issues with regards to ITAR and everything else that goes along. This really stands on its own as far as level of complexity, and the ecosystem is very unique. So, but I would say that that's all part of, you know, why I wanted to do this. I wanted to do a couple things. I wanted to kind of get out of semis and really kind of be part of what the next huge growth opportunity for mankind was, which was really space. And then also have the opportunity to build a company and take it public, which, you know, fortunately we were able to do. So I think I've checked all the boxes, other than the fact that I've got a much higher aspirational, you know, market cap, you know, kind of target for Rocket Lab than we currently experience, but that'll come as well.
Totally. What would you say are the biggest differences between the two industries you've been in? I know both are very hard, but just I guess as the CFO.
You know, I would say the semiconductor industry, you know, kind of went from your original, you know, IDM or integrated device model, where companies like Intel and AMD and TI, they own their own fabs, right? And then the market moved to a fabless model, where you get a bunch of brilliant engineers and design a sophisticated device, and they basically throw the design over to somebody like TSMC or Chartered or you know, or something like that, and they would manufacture the chip for you, drop ship it to your customer. So that became an incredibly elegant model. Chips, the technology involved in chips is challenging for sure, but the business model is quite simple, and the infrastructure around it is quite minimal. So you can really direct your R&D. Well, you can direct your capital to very targeted uses in developing these chips. On the rocket side of things, the satellite side is very different, because, you know, you have a lot of things you got to feed. You got to feed the R&D engine. You got to feed the infrastructure engine. You got to feed the other parts of the infrastructure, as far as like business systems and all the other kind of capabilities. So it's a much more challenging business to operate, in the fact that a lot more choices you have to make than in the semi market, which your choices are relatively narrow. I would say also that in the semiconductor market, you were much more in control over your own destiny, because you design the chip and then you pick a qualified foundry partner, and as long as you pick the right chip design and customers, then you're off to the races. In this business, you have a lot of dependencies on third parties. And that's really what's proven to be the Achilles heel of a lot of companies, is that they overestimate the execution capabilities of their partners. And that can really lead to lots of problems. So you can go out of business in this business for no fault of your own. You can go out of business because you put a key dependency on somebody that didn't execute. So you don't really see that on the semiconductor side, but you do see it in this business. And I think, you know, one of the things that we've done very consciously is eliminated many of those choke points. So, and you know, to make us much more self-deterministic. So when you look on the rocket side of the business, out of necessity, because of ITAR restrictions, when Pete started the company in New Zealand and he wanted to buy elements or subsystems from the traditional aerospace ecosystem, they'd say, well, sorry, you're not a US company. We can't sell you this ITAR control technology. So Pete's like, okay, well, I guess I have to make it myself. So as a function of that, we became very independent and so very vertically integrated. So we are probably, I'd say, and some, you might argue, we're the most vertically integrated rocket manufacturer around. We literally bring in carbon fiber materials and make our tanks. We bring in, Inconel powder to print our engines. We make our own harnesses, right? We do a lot of the avionics ourselves and so forth. So we're very different in that respect. And so we eliminated that dependency on people that can kind of let you down and get you into a lot of trouble. And then we basically mirrored that, on the satellite side too. And we did that a little bit differently. In that respect, we acquired a lot of capabilities, right? So we've acquired 4 companies now for our space systems business. And all of that was with the eye of, well, if we're going to build these very complex space systems, we need to own all of the real critical subsystems that go into those. And so that's why we acquired Sinclair Interplanetary about almost 4 years ago now. We acquired the reaction wheels, and the star trackers, and the sun sensors, and torque rods. And then we bought Solero to pick up the solar capacity. And we picked up PSC for separation systems and ASI for the command and control software. And then we developed a bunch of other things that normally people would outsource, but we basically kind of insourced and vertically integrated around. So Pete's been very, 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 very disciplined on basically identifying where other people can screw us over and basically take that off the table. And so some of the things that we've done aren't necessarily because we think they can be great merchant businesses, although there are those opportunities as well. But some cases, like, we just don't want this. This has the ability to screw our own programs in a way that we can't stomach. So let's go make that investment to take that risk off the table for ourselves and our customers.
I imagine that's probably that's seeming every day more prudent, given you've probably seen all these supply chain issues in aerospace.
Absolutely.
We'll come back on the space systems, but before that, I wanted to ask you about the point you made earlier about capital efficiency, because that is something that we have seen in the industry that has not been a focal point. And part of that was the sort of SPAC boom and bust that we saw over the last couple of years. So I'm curious, from your perspective, how have you been so capital efficient? Because we've seen all these rocket programs and these upstarts raise all this money, and unfortunately, both on the legacy and on the upstart side, there's not been a lot to show for it. So what's the secret? What's the secret to being so capital efficient?
Yeah, you can almost go back to, the probably the most famous thing that one of the early CEOs of Intel was known for, Andy Grove, was known. He wrote a book called Only the Paranoid Survive. And I think that that's kind of in our nature as a company. We're afraid that the last money we raised will be the last money we ever raise. And so spend it like it's the most precious thing on earth, right? So we're very paranoid. One thing we can never do is run out of money. And that's always the very forefront of our minds. I think, as a culture, we've grown a very frugal organization. Everybody knows what everybody else does. I mean, if you've been to our offices, when you see our layouts, I mean, there's no offices actually. It's all bullpen seating, and there's a lot of things that come from that. There's open communication, which is probably the most important thing. If you want something, you literally stand up and ask the person on the other side of your wall kind of what they're working on, or if they can help you. The other fact that there's no place to hide. Right. Everybody's got to be efficient, because you have people here that are very noticeably just literally working night and day to get Herculean things done. And there's no room for freeloaders, and freeloaders get identified very quickly here. And I think part of it too is that Pete is, he comes from a very scrappy background. And so you make do with less than others. And I think we've known from the beginning that we can't compete with Elon and Jeff and large government primes based on kind of outspending them. That's impossible. So what we have to do is just do things very, very differently. And so everything starts with how do we make this a profitable endeavor? So, we don't kind of try to make something and figure out later how to make it profitable. We start from the very beginning and say, what does this need to look like at the end game, knowing what's going to happen with pricing, knowing what's going to happen with inflation and other things, how do we ensure that we're going to make money off this product line or this service that we're looking to deliver? And I'm by my nature, I hate spending money. I think most CFOs are probably in that camp, so I don't think I'm particularly unique in that. But Pete's even tighter than I am, right? So it makes my job from that respect very easy because we have, for example, within the company, if you want to spend more than $40,000 on something, we have to write a formal business case. It needs to be presented to Pete and I, and we have to formally approve it before anything gets spent on that order, right? Other than production orders of like raw materials and stuff like that. But if it's to invest in infrastructure or R&D, we all have to approve it. So it's a very tightly controlled environment, which is, we also have to be careful that we balance, controls and frugalness with the ability to move quickly and be agile, right? Which means that people like Pete and myself have to make ourselves available for lots of things. So it makes our life a little bit more challenging perhaps, but as long as you're willing to kind of move quickly and respond quickly, then you can have control and basically speed at the same time.
One of the things you brought up earlier about space is oftentimes you're not in total control of your destiny. And I'm wondering, in terms of the launch business specifically, that probably where it's most notable, how do you sort of manage that volatility? You never know when a customer might not be ready. Obviously, we've seen that, some of the quarters where maybe a launch slips or whatever. How does one kind of get accustomed to managing that?
Well, I think with things like launch cadence, I think it comes down to communication, right? I think we've been very open since we came public as a company to say, look, launch is lumpy, right? I don't know if I can count the number of times I said lumpy, right, on quarterly calls and investor meetings and so forth. So you just got to condition your investors to realize that it's lumpy, and that as long as your backlog is solid, it's more of a timing issue than it is will it happen? I think the other thing that you can do, and we do, is we look to where we can overbook our manifest, because we just assume that a certain amount of our customers is going to slip. And so, just get as much front end loaded in your queue as you can. So if something pushes out, you got something to backfill it with. I would say to date, the market's not quite, or our customers aren't quite established enough to have a predictable routine. They're still getting surprised by like a radio failure in final TVAC. Or something else happening where they've got to go back and kind of root cause the issue and then go back to their vendors and go. So I think, because the industry is still doing very much, at least where we're at on the smaller launch side of things, we don't have like large constellations yet. You haven't seen people building hundreds of satellites. It's still kind of one-offs, or maybe half a dozen or a dozen. We're not in that Starlink realm, right, where they're making thousands of satellites per year. Hopefully, we get there. Not only, I think we will absolutely get there when we bring Neutron to market. That's going to have exposure to that more established part of the market than more the nascent kind of early stage, where a lot of things that fly on Electron are Pathfinder missions, right? Just to see if the tech demos work.
Yeah. On launch, I'm reminded. So when I had Pete on 2 years ago, people were saying launch is going to be a commodity. There's so many companies, right? And fast forward now, I think we can both agree that that's definitely not true. So question is, why is it so hard? Why is it so hard to do it? We launched, the example I always use, we went to the moon, like, so whatever, 60, 70 years ago. Yet it's so hard for all these companies to survive, to put stuff up.
Yeah, that's interesting. We've thought a lot about that. And, I was actually doing a little bit of research not too long ago on this. I mean, we forget too that when we went to the moon, 60 years ago now, I guess almost 60 years ago.
Yes.
That was the collective resources of an entire nation, right? And so the amount of money in today's dollars was staggering, right? It even makes, investments made by Jeff and Elon pale, right? So I think I think people really, it's difficult to disconnect the dots, because you think of these huge NASA programs way back that were, just huge national programs, versus commercial entities, trying to do this, which it's very, very different. So I think not having unlimited resources is a challenge, but as we've seen with Blue Origin, even when you have unlimited resources, it's still not a given, right? You can still get delays and so forth. I think that also a few years ago, in fact, if you go back into, I call it the 2015, 2016, 2017 time frame, there were literally over 100 aspirational small launch vehicle companies. And I think what you find is that a lot of those companies were basically being driven or created by entrepreneurs who really weren't hardcore engineering, physics minded people, right? And so I think you had a lot of promotional folks that just said, hey, everyone's talking about how much money you can raise in space and start a cool rocket company. In reality, there's very few people on this planet that can really execute a real rocket development program. In fact, if you look, you can count on both hands how many entities in history have done it, including governments, right?
Yep.
So I think there was just this fluffy promotionalist opportunity for people to go raise a bunch of money, and then we saw what happened with that. Like if you've seen Wild Wild Space, the documentary on HBO, or you have, I think there's a pretty good example of one of those in there, right? And I think that was even one of the more quote unquote credible ones that actually got through the public process, right? Think of how many others didn't and kind of ended up kind of hitting a wall. So it's an incredibly complex thing because, battling physics is a challenge. When you've got a rocket like, look at Electron, for example, has roughly 66,000 parts. In a lot of cases, it takes one of those parts to fail and you've lost the mission. So there's very little room for lack of quality control. And I think what we still haven't seen is we're the only small launch company that's actually managed to scale, right? And be launching dozens of times. You find other people where, and we've said this before, building your first rocket is relatively easy. Building your 50th rocket is actually harder than building your first rocket, because instead of your engineers and people like Pete lovingly kind of looking at every little threading of a screw and nut, and because they designed it, they know exactly how it's supposed to look when it's assembled. Well, now on the 50th rocket, you've got assembly techs following work instructions. They didn't design it. They don't know. They don't know the impact of something being off by a few degrees or being over torqued or something else, right? So it's complex in not just designing the vehicle, but then also doing it in a way where you can actually do it reliably, consistently, and actually make money doing it. So it's just really tough on almost every aspect. But the great thing is once you figured it out and you cracked the nut, then you've got a fairly protected area. Like to your earlier point, this market has not commoditized. We don't believe it's going to commoditize because, again, there's very few people that can actually pull this off. And I think the window for raising the amount of capital that was necessary to let you try has closed.
Yeah.
So I think the launch companies that you see today are probably the launch companies you're going to see in the future at most.
Yeah. To your point, I love the example about, having the Pete and all the PhDs around for the first one. And then by the 51, you have to teach someone who probably doesn't have that pedigree.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a silly question. How does one get comfortable along the way of transferring that putting that level of responsibility on someone who isn't, whether it's Pete or it's the team of PhDs or whatever who are working on it?
You just have to instill in the organization the importance of quality, right? And we give practical tests to most, if not all, the people, certainly people that work on the production floor. Whether you're a production engineer or a tech, you have practical tests to see how you move your hands, right? And how you kind of place your tools and how you replace your tools and stuff like that. So we select very carefully for people that have, I would say, the same level of attention to detail as Pete, for example, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a very rigorous selection process, and part of it is we have a reasonably high turnover rate in those functions because some people just don't make it, right? And you figure that out relatively quickly. Even if they get through the exam, you might get them on the job and realize, not quite working out. We got to basically kind of make a change. So I think it really comes down to culture, right? And making sure that you instill that quality culture in every role.
So let's talk about Neutron, which I think there's a lot of excitement, obviously, around. Can you just remind us what are the main reasons for moving to develop a larger rocket?
Yep, there are a couple very clear reasons for us. I guess the most basic is the fact that if you there's a very large TAM in deploying a larger size spacecraft. So Electron can deploy up to 300 kgs to low Earth orbit. But there's a lot of spacecraft that don't fall within that category. And where there are a lot of spacecraft in that category, mass class wise, when you want to deploy a constellation, you want to deploy multiple of those into a single plane. And so it's just not efficient. And there's not enough time to basically do all of these like thousands of Electron launches, right, to deploy a constellation. So it's all about getting a greater number of satellites on orbit more quickly to support the constellation deployments that we see taking place today and in the future. So it's all about enabling constellations. That's probably the most easy and kind of primary rationale for the vehicle. But there's a secondary one, which is, look, if we go back to the very first interview I had with Pete back in 2017, I said, well, Pete, what do you really want this business to be? What are you trying to create here? And, he didn't say, I want to build the world's most dominant small dedicated launch company. He said, I want to build an end-to-end space company. And I said, okay, what does that mean? He goes, well, we're gonna be able to build satellites. So design satellites, build satellites, launch satellites, operate those satellites in orbit, so that ultimately we can have our own assets in orbit. So he said that from the first day, I want my own constellation assets in orbit, and I want to generate recurring revenue from those assets in orbit. And I think we've kind of seen that, the fact that, SpaceX is more than 10 years older than we are, they got there faster than we did. But I think the models are they're going to look fairly similar. Now, are we likely to go after, a Starlink sized kind of constellation? Probably not anytime soon. It'll be a much more targeted application where you would need, whether it's dozens or hundreds of satellites, but probably not tens of thousands of satellites. But ultimately, we're very clear that we will have our own assets on orbit, and we're going to kind of create that next leg of the growth stool off of the application side of the market.
I want to come back to that because
and we need Neutron for that, right? We're very, very clear that if you really look at at least what I believe has enabled Starlink's pretty amazing kind of success to date has been the fact it's been a launch vehicle, right? So if SpaceX didn't have a reusable Falcon 9, Starlink would not be what it is today. And we think the same thing. If we believe that it's a huge advantage to have a reusable medium class launch vehicle to deploy your own assets, because if not, then you're at the mercy of merchant launch providers who may have conflicting interests or needs or demands on their own capacity. So we think it gives you a very defensible and kind of almost unassailable position if you have that capability.
I want to come back to that. But beforehand, on space systems, this is a business that has actually gotten quite large and growing very quickly. I think maybe people don't realize that because the company is called Rocket Lab, so you obviously think of rockets. Can you go back to kind of the genesis of that? I know it ties into the bigger theme, but you made several acquisitions. I think you've talked about potentially making more. How did you kind of put that business together? Considering you start off as a rocket company, but now you actually have a very, very fast growing, very, very potentially lucrative space systems business.
Yeah, well, again, Pete was kind of like, first thing I'm developing the Electron launch vehicle. So once we've had a couple successful launches on Electron, at that point, Pete goes, all right, time to start working on space systems, right? So we're going to use our Photon, like our kick stage from the rocket. We're going to turn that into a satellite as a kind of first demo or proof of concept. And so he goes, okay, well, tell me what it takes to build a satellite. So we assemble a team and they say, okay, well, here's the bill of materials for a satellite. And it had things like reaction wheels and star trackers and batteries, all these different things. And Pete goes, okay, first one on here, reaction wheel, right? So let's call up the leading supplier of reaction wheels for the small satellite market and put some, get some of them delivered, right? So he calls up Doug Sinclair at Sinclair Interplanetary and says, I need X number of reaction wheels. Doug goes, okay, that'll be about 12 months. I'll deliver you some reaction wheels. And Pete's like, 12 months? Are you kidding me? Like, this is not how you grow a nascent industry into something that's huge, right? By waiting a year for a reaction wheel, right? So that really put us on the path where we kind of sat around and said, okay, well, let's revisit that. Let's look at this BOM or bill of materials for the satellite and identify each one of the critical subsystems that satellite that could be a choke point. And let's go acquire that so that we or develop it. And we've done both. So Sinclair was the first part of that, and Solera was another piece, and then PSC was yet another piece, because it doesn't make, what's the point of having developing and building these satellites if all of a sudden you go to buy a separation system and you have to wait 12 to 18 months for that. So it was all focused around how do you eliminate choke points and create more self-determination in your model. And then, along the way, we developed our own radios, and we developed our own composites capabilities, and we developed, different propulsion systems and so forth. So we've been pretty consistent, or very consistent, in again, eliminating those choke points and bottlenecks that allow us to ramp much more quickly. And so that's really kind of what's informed that strategy. And there's still elements that we still need, right? So if you look right now, we've got a great bus solution, but where we stop is at the payload side. So it's very likely that some of the things that we'll continue to look for to bring in-house are payload capabilities, because those are also things that they could take some time, like, to develop from a greenfield. And so it probably makes more sense and more capital efficient to basically go acquire those things. So those are one of the focus areas. There's still a few more pieces of the bus bomb that we want to get, but then we're incrementally looking more towards the payload. And then, on the application side, those are also areas where we could consider, and we are considering, inorganic ways to enter that market.
On the space systems, I know it culminated in the big SDA when you got was it to the very end of last year. How did that all come together? I know it was, I understand it was competitive. You were competing against some very big people who've been doing it a long time, and you won. You obviously won. What was the what were the factors there?
Well, I think one of the things we've been pretty disciplined about, we don't take on work where we won't just take on work to take on work, right? So we take on work that actually allows us to learn at somebody else's expense. So we love to get paid to learn, right? And so as we were developing the capabilities that we were required to kind of prime a mission, we were looking at the next big thing. Let's back up one step. Before the SDA, the real enabler was, and we've done a whole bunch, like, it's gone from single missions, like, these Escapade satellites that are going to Mars, and then and Varda Space. And so there's been a whole bunch of these programs that we've executed on. But then ultimately, the first, I would say, major constellation that we landed was the Globalstar MDA opportunity, where we're providing the bus, MDA is the prime, and Globalstar is the constellation operator. And we had to develop some capabilities there that were very unique, that didn't really exist in the small satellite market, as far as, radiation hardening, because of, where the satellites were going to be operating at altitude. Also the kind of the reliability of the network had to be a certain thing given the end customer's requirements. So to do those things, we had to create new IP. So now we have those capabilities. So then in doing that, then when we went and said, okay, well, what's the next thing we need to get? Well, there's some other capabilities, particularly we want to be able to prime. So when we want to have our own assets and our own constellation, we need to be able to prime the entire build. And so let's go win a design where we are the prime, and we have to go bus all the way through payload, right? And on-orbit operations. And so in going to pitch for that SDA program, we were able to show them all of the IP that we developed for the Globalstar MDA that would be applicable to SDA, and at the same time show them the level of supply chain integration which de-risked our program much more than others. So it's a little bit strange or kind of paradoxical to think about the fact that how can we be less risky than a Lockheed or a Northrop or somebody like, or L3 Harris? Well, in a lot of ways, we're more vertically integrated than those guys are. And where have these programs really stumbled? Supply chain. So since we're so vertically integrated, we don't have to go bid out solar, to somebody else and rely upon them delivering, something in an early capacity constrained market. Same thing for the reaction wheels and the star trackers, propulsion, all those kinds of things. We actually are able to control much more carefully. Now, not the missing, but the final piece in that puzzle is going to be Neutron. Because now not only can we design, build in a very vertically integrated way, but now we can launch everything as well. Right. So gone will be the days where we do all this work, build things up, and then hand it off to somebody else to launch. Right. Now, they're procured differently. They have different paths of procurement, but at least now we'll be in the game, right? Where we can say, and by the way, down the road when we're pitching the launch piece, we'll have a very well thought out, I'd say, architecturally advantaged solution with regards to things like dispensers and so forth, right? To make sure that we know kind of going in what winning looks like, right? And we can pre-position everything to have the full end-to-end solution. And that's where the whole vision again comes back to how important it is to be an end-to-end player.
So the last piece, which is we talked a little bit earlier on the services side. I know you're keeping this one a bit close to the chest because obviously don't want to give away too much. But let me frame it, maybe the question a little bit differently in a different context. There's a lot of businesses right now that I have tried to do services, whether it's connectivity or the flavors of that or Earth observation. What is your kind of general view on what's going on right now? Do you think these things are very successful? Do you think there's issues of utilization? How do you think about the services right now, and what are sort of the strengths and weaknesses that you see?
Well, so the applications market is very bifurcated. Like there's a lot of different verticals, right? And so we look out there and we see successful examples of very successful, well, potentially successful business models on all of the different verticals, whether it's all the different flavors of Earth observation, right? Because again, you think of Earth observation as one category, but really remote sensing, if you back up, there's a lot of different layers and kind of verticals to that. So I would say that the biggest, like if you look at the biggest target with a bullseye on it is comms. It's the biggest market, right? But even within comms, there's lots of different things that you can look at within comms, right? There's a lot of new services that are being deployed to consumers, and then there's the enterprise, and then there's the government side of things. So there's lots of capabilities. And so what we're really focused on is, again, how do we get paid to learn to be able to bring these complex solutions to market, that we can use to our own benefit down the road for building our own constellation. So for us, I don't think you can say we're going to be dogmatically, we're going to do one thing and one narrow part of one market. We're going to play across different parts of the market. We're going to place a few bets. And I think the one thing that's attractive to constellation operators about potentially partnering in a very strategic way with Rocket Lab is if you think about what a constellation operator has to deal with today, they basically have to go out and they have to basically define their spacecraft needs. They have to basically find somebody to build the spacecraft. The spacecraft manufacturer then has to manage all the complexities around a very distributed supply chain. They got to go procure launch. They got to operate the satellites on orbit. They got to manage the end customer dynamic, right? And what we can come in and say, look, we can actually design the spacecraft, manufacture with our own supply chain. We can launch them on our own rockets. We can operate them on orbit. And that really allows the constellation piece of the business to focus on maximizing how to manage the customer and the data, right? And so I think that applies to whether it's Earth observation, communications, experimentation. That applies a lot of different places. But ultimately, we're going to pick an application that we think can have reasonable scale to it. We're not really interested in tens of millions of dollar kind of lines of business applications. It's got to be, it's $100 million plus individual chunks of revenue. In some cases, hopefully much, much higher than that.
On comms, so one thing we often hear from people is that there's way too much capacity coming online. Do you subscribe to that?
We always think about how, when I came out of the broadband markets, I spent a lot of time working in the broadband markets. It was terrestrial broadband, for the most part, but people would always say, oh my gosh, how are you going to use 100 meg? Right. How are you using a gig? Well, now 10 gig. And then it's like, so I think it's amazing. Applications will find a way to consume bandwidth. Yeah. And so I think it's always been the case. It will continue to be the case. So I'm not at all concerned that at some point we're going to have way too much bandwidth out there. It's never been the case in comms, at least not since I've been around in 30 plus years.
Right. That's a very fair point. That's a very fair point. So just one last one for me. I think we can conclude on Neutron. Obviously, people are very excited about a maiden launch in the middle of next year, potentially. How are we feeling about that, and what should we be looking out for in the next, call it 3 to 6 months as some key milestones?
Well, I can tell you, I feel a heck of a lot better now than I did 2 months ago, before we had a successful hot fire test of Archimedes. So, everyone's focused on the, on the fiery, the hot end of the stick, right? Which is the engine, and rightfully so. It's always the long pull in a rocket development program. So getting that right is important. And I think as we've talked about before, we took a very different approach in developing Archimedes. We didn't develop like a PR piece or something just to do a demo. Like, we built this engine with flight hardware, right? So we can go directly from R&D into production, which takes a little bit longer. It's a little bit of a riskier process, but it all gets back to the capital efficiency, right? So that's the most efficient way to develop an engine. And that's why if you think about the ability to deliver a program like Neutron, including all the infrastructure, everything around, for $300 million, I mean, that's unheard of, right? So you got to do things differently, and Archimedes development was part of that way of doing things differently. But there's other work streams. So when I think about kind of the rocket development program, you've got propulsion, you've got structures, which are tanks and all that, the fairings, all those kinds of things. You've got avionics and ground communications, and you've got infrastructure. And that infrastructure could be pad infrastructure and manufacturing infrastructure. And so all four of those work streams are kind of going in parallel. Again, everyone focuses on the engine, but there's a lot of really intense things going on in those other three work streams. And so, we've got eyes on all of those things. They're all progressing very much, kind of in step. And what you don't want to do is get one of those things to come out of step. So if you're lagging on engine and you're racing to finish your pad at Wallops, you're going to deploy capital way quicker than you really need to, right? And so it's all about timing these things to make sure they all come together at roughly the same time. And I think for the most part, it's coming together that way. I would say overall, we did have to push the Neutron program out by about 6 months earlier this year. And I think, that wasn't because we hit a roadblock or we had a technical challenge. It was the fact that it just took longer to gather momentum on the program, because hiring, over the last couple of years has been a difficult thing to do, right? Relatively speaking, compared to other periods. So now we've got that critical mass, and we were able to kind of continue to execute on the plan as we anticipated. So I think now we feel much better. Again, we don't see any glaring technical risks. We don't see any impediments to getting the infrastructure for the pad in place. We largely have a lot of the production infrastructure in place. We're leveraging a lot of the avionics from Electron. A lot of the structural work we're leveraging from Electron with carbon composites. So the real big piece of innovation was around the engine, right? This different architecture for engine versus Rutherford for Electron. And now that we've got successful hot fire, I think, we've kind of cracked that nut. So I sleep much better now.
Fantastic. We're all certainly very excited for that. I'm sure we could chat for much longer, but I want to be mindful of your time, Adam. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Pod Zepp from Deutsche Bank Research. I'm Edison Yu, and thank you everyone for joining.
Yeah. So what do you guys think? For me, this was really mind-blowing. He gave some very interesting updates on where Neutron is standing. He gave updates on the constellation. Like, what did you guys think of that? That to me was mind-blowing. So I took you can put questions in the comments, and then I can answer them. I just want to go over my notes that I took here. So Adam didn't want to work for Rocket Lab, and he basically got closed on Rocket Lab when he was invited to New Zealand and he saw the capital efficiency that these guys were having. Then he said that it's been a very rough ride, and he's very happy with the journey, but he has had a much higher aspirational market cap in mind that is yet to come. I so want to ask him what is that market cap that he was thinking, and we probably have a next interview coming up after the next earnings, but I somehow feel he's not going to answer this question. And then he went over something that I think is two modes of Rocket Lab. One of them was he was talking about the space industry, how you're dependent on other companies to produce things. So live examples of this, Relativity started outsourcing parts of their rockets. And we saw a tweet where they said that the fairing was going good. And then within an hour, it turned out that that was a Swiss factory that was making fairings, and it was the same fairing as the European Ariane rockets fairing, right? So if that company is late on the fairing, or Ariane comes with a very big order, then relativity is effed. Or the ULA's Vulcan was very much delayed because they were buying engines from Blue Origin, and Blue Origin's engines were delayed, and it delayed all of the companies. So they basically either acquired or brought in-house everything that could slow down the production. They did this both for the rocket launches and for space systems. So this is one of their moats, and this is basically how they got the $500 million SDA contract. He even said it's funny because the government determined that they were less risky than Lockheed Martin or L3 Harris, and the only way that is possible is because they're more vertically integrated. And I guess that the government is very allergic these days on cost overruns and schedule delays, and schedule delays almost always mean cost overruns, right? So that was very, very interesting. Moat number 2 was how extremely frugal the culture is, and how they're able to they don't have freeloaders because everybody's like working so hard. And I think that is the second moat of Rocket Lab, is how they're able to keep this culture. He also talked about it that, the first rockets was built by Peter Beck, and the 50th rocket is built by your run-of-the-mill factory worker, right? So then you need to be able to hire factory workers that will have Peter Beck's standard of assembling a rocket. And I believe that they have done a very, very good job of this. Then something that was very interesting, that he said that small launch is actually the trailblazing side of the space industry. So a lot of their customers are not established companies with established production lines, and that's why you have like a lot of delays. But once they have Neutron up and ready, those will be for thousands of satellites that can be in constellations, and the companies that would order from them, they would have much more much better production lines, and the whole Neutron line will be much more predictable. So here's the super interesting thing. He gave a full update about how Neutron is doing, and he said that since the hot fire test has been successfully completed, he sleeps very well at night. So there's this conspiracy theory going around that there wasn't really a hot fire test, and that's why the video is not being released. And the max hot fire test has been only 3 seconds. And I'm telling you, like I've been telling you guys, that this is a myth. I'm 100% sure that the reason why they're not releasing a hot fire video is because they want to be different from all the other rocket companies. All the other rocket companies have to rush out to release the hot fire test so that they can, reg more money from the investors, and so that they can raise more capital. And Rocket Lab, it does not need to raise more capital. And I guess we're going to have a very loud and nice video of the Neutron flight, and that's how I prefer it. I can't say I'm not annoyed by not having a cool hot fire video of the Archimedes, but I'm pretty sure this is why they're not releasing it. Now, the main thing is the application side. So, there's so much to unpack here. So he basically said that they're going to make a few bets. So not just one bet. And even if it's Earth observation or communication or whatever it is, it can be a niche part of that. And they are even considering inorganic expansion into the constellation business, which completely makes sense if you think about it, because whereas Blue Origin has unlimited capital, Elon Musk has unlimited capital, Rocket Lab doesn't have money, so they have to think. So if there was a company that is struggling on the stock market with their constellation, or maybe an older company that has a very hard time getting rights to replenish their websites, their satellites. I don't have any companies that come to mind, but maybe you could acquire this company super cheap, and then because you have the launch capability and you can manufacture the satellite, you can just run up the business, and you have existing customers. I guess that would be the fastest way of getting to cash flow positive with your constellation. And again, Rocket Lab has acquired 4 businesses super successfully. So I am definitely not against this version. Then he talked about constellation operating companies joining them, partnering with them. So that would, the way I imagine that is that you have a I don't want to say a company name, but so I'm just speculating, thinking aloud here. But let's say you have Planet Labs, who are very good at selling Earth observation to the customers, but because they need to get the satellites up there, they have their own in-house satellite team. Then they have to buy launches, and maybe they can get rid of all that and just hire Rocket Lab. It's much more capital efficient for them, and Rocket Lab actually gets paid to learn how to do a constellation. So very, very interesting thoughts. Then I saw some of you were quite concerned that, if they go into a niche business, it means that they're not going to scale like crazy. And that's true in a way, but keep in mind, if Rocket Lab would go after a Starlink, let's say they would be a 4th competitor, because you have Starlink, you have the Kuiper constellation, I think you have OneWeb, and if Rocket Lab would be like a 4th one in this, it would be billions and billions of dollars that would need to be invested upfront to shoot up the satellites. And what Adam Spice was basically saying is they have to think, they don't have the money, and things have to be profitable to begin with. And if they would want to raise capital to launch a 3 billion satellite constellation, I mean, we would be diluted into oblivion. It would suck for us as shareholders. So he did say that the opportunities they want to go after is $100 million plus scale, and maybe even much more than that. So I think what's going to happen is they're going to have a few $100 million opportunities, and then they will find something that really clicks, and then they will scale that up. But they're going to scale that up from a position of strength and from the cash flow of the company. So that was, sorry guys, I rambled on. I just wanted to have a quick recap. Now I want to see what you guys are saying. Vince, did you see that Palantir hit 38 today? Yes, I did, and it's crazy. I feel Palantir is super overvalued currently, but I'm holding my shares. I'm not selling. So let me see you guys' comments, and if you have any questions. Adam is growing on me. I like the gut. I think you mean the guy. Yeah, he's one of the best CEOs that I've seen in the companies that I follow. I mean, I never knew who Tesla's CFO was. I didn't like Palantir CFO. Like I hear the guy speak on conference calls, but Adam is so good on articulating, Rocket Lab's strengths and weaknesses and where they are and projections, and in some ways he's better than Peter. So he is really a good guy. Fully agree with the mind-blowing capital efficiency. Yep. Yeah, SpaceX is famous for vertical and in-house manufacturing. And if you think about it, SpaceX is the only space company that is really, really successful that I know of. So that is the business model of space. You have to be vertically integrated. Otherwise, things cost way too much and you're dependent on other people. Yeah, NVIDIA and Apple are not vertically integrated, Vince. Can be a moat. I would say this, that yes, it can be a moat in certain industries, not in the space industry. So in the space industry, name me a space or rocket company that is successful, that is not vertically integrated. There you go. Yeah, Silly Bond, LLMs went from cutting edge to commodity in about 10 minutes. Will Rocket do the same from here forward? I don't think so. They actually addressed this in the call. It's so interesting. He said that there was about 100 rocket startups. There is 2 successful Western rocket startups that is launching at scale. That is SpaceX and Rocket Lab. And the guy, and they even said it in the interview, that your 50th rocket is harder to achieve than your first one, because the first one was being assembled by Elon Musk and the close team, or in Rocket Lab's case, Peter Beck. And the 50th one is being assembled by the run-of-the-mill factory workers who are not 1 in a million engineers like Elon Musk and Peter Beck. And you know, they will not see like, oh, this little part is a millimeter off, this is going to fail. They probably, I'm not even sure that they even know what each part does, you know? So you have to have really, really good systems. And Adam Spice even said that you don't really have yet a second company that has scaled up production. So you don't even see if the other like even the companies that survived the first wall of fire, which is, you know, like get a successful rocket into orbit, then the second wall of fire is like, can you scale up the rocket successfully? And yeah, I don't believe it will be a commodity, because that business is just so tough. Yeah, I agree. Their biggest moat is, or one of their biggest moats is the company culture. Will Rocket Lab frugality mean that the stock price climbs faster? How come the market analysts aren't talking more about the company's frugality? It's because the market analysts have probably 1 hour to study Rocket Lab, and they don't do it like me and Dave G and Matt and Scotto and all the amazing Rocket Lab content creators. And this is one of the points that they miss. This is why we are beating them in returns when it comes to stocks. Yeah, they could buy Black Sky. I didn't want to give company names. For me, I know about other space companies, but I'm not so good at other space companies other than Rocket Lab. So I would have to study what exactly Black Sky is doing. But I think they're having financial difficulties. And yeah, they might be bought up by Rocket Lab if it makes sense. Yeah, Stan, I'd rather be diluted into oblivion at first in order to reach 100 billion valuation. Look, Astra had this mindset that they're like, yeah, money is going to be available. We just move really fast. And this strategy was working until it wasn't. And then they ran out of money and they went bankrupt. And it's really important to note that Rocket Lab does not have unlimited funding. Unfortunately, it's a relatively unknown company. It's not backed by a billionaire like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. And ask yourself this question: if Elon Musk would take a bad turn at SpaceX, and let's say he says let's say that I don't think it's going to happen, but let's say that the Starship project would fail for whatever reason, it's not viable to continue that, and Elon Musk would come out and say, sorry guys, the Starship failed, but I have this other idea for a new rocket and I'm raising money. Do you think he would have a problem to raise that money? No. But now let's turn the tables and say that Rocket Lab messes up on Neutron, and then Peter Beck comes out and says, sorry guys, I wasted all this money, Neutron didn't work, we can't make it reusable, but I have this new idea. Do you think he could raise money? Exactly. This is why they have to be very, very careful in which direction they go. And I really love how they're addressing this. does it mean frugality, that they can expand faster, and will it help them do acquisitions sooner? So I think that the frugality can make it look like that they're moving slower in the short term, but I think it's going to pay off very big in the long term. Francisco, CFO. Yeah, I think I said CEO. No, Adam Spice is the CFO. Do you think if you don't buy Tesla before 1010, you're going to miss out and be left behind 250 today? I don't know. I sold put options on Tesla when it was at 200. I made a cool 3,000 something. I actually closed the position today. I don't like necessarily the price at 250. I liked it a lot more at 200. But congrats for the shareholders. Hey, Adam King, nice to see you here. Agreed, it's better to be careful. Look at SpaceX, both ambitions and excellent execution. Musk was not a billionaire when he created SpaceX and Falcon 9. Yeah, I mean, it's true and not true. He was not a billionaire, but at that time, money was also worth more. And he was a very well-known part of PayPal, very serial entrepreneur. Let's put it this way. When he started the company. Exactly. The story of two companies. Beck tells stories about banks and investors rejecting him when he first spoke with them, and Musk has never had such stories to share. Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you so much for watching this interview with me. I think it was really, really mind-blowing. Again, this Adam Spice guy, he's doing good. He's a very good CFO. So let me know in the comments what you thought about it. Please make sure you subscribe to the channel. I appreciate all the channel members. Thank you guys so much for supporting the channel, and I'll see you in the next video. Ciao, ciao.